Hello, everybody. It's great to see you all here for this webinar, Mind Medicine webinar. For those who don't know me, my name is Peter Hunt, Chair of Mind Medicine Australia. I'm delighted that Dr. Adam Gazzaley can join us today because we're going to really sort of hear about the frontiers of medical treatments in terms of this interaction with technology and patient experience. Before I do that, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We'd like to acknowledge the elders, wisdom traditions, cultures and communities who have used these medicines for thousands of years for their intelligence and healing properties. Before I introduce Dr. Gazzaley more formally, I do want to say a few words about Mind Medicine Australia and where we're at in terms of the work we're doing in Australia. So we might just quickly go on to share screen. All right, so just a bit of an update on Mind Medicine and what we're trying to do. The point to emphasize is that we're focused on medical use of psychedelic medicines. We're not focused on recreational use. Our aim is to broaden the treatment paradigm in this country so that many more people suffering from mental illness can get well. In terms of why we started Mind Medicine, it really comes from this slide. In Australia, we have some of the worst mental health statistics in the world. 1 in 5 of us pre-COVID had a mental illness. Particularly revealing was the number of people on antidepressants. Pre-COVID, it was 1 in 8, including 1 in 4 older people and 1 in 30 younger people. And these numbers will now be worse. And one of the questions I'm almost certainly going to ask Dr. Gazzaley is this interface with technology, which can be so helpful. It also creates challenges for us in the future as the accelerated pace of change just keeps getting more challenging for people to keep up with, and the effects of that on mental illness. The thing about antidepressants is obviously that they do have low effect size. So whilst they're being handed out more and more, unfortunately, they can have not insignificant side effects, and whilst they can help some people, they don't help a large number of other people. In terms of veterans, the numbers are even worse. I mean, this is really an appalling set of statistics. It's almost 1 in 2 veterans pre-COVID had a mental illness. Comorbidity is much worse. Levels of PTSD, alcohol abuse, depression, about 3 times worse than the general population. So, in terms of a group that have served their country, these statistics are truly terrible. Obviously, mental health has really big costs, and in my view, we should be focused on mental health treatments purely out of compassion, so that people can live the sort of lives that should be their entitlement. But the reality is the cost to our economy is enormous, and if we can have treatment innovation that works and we can get more people into remission, that will hopefully release a lot of funding that can go and support other people with mental health issues where the treatments aren't working. I've talked about this many times, but the big elephant in the room with mental health in Australia, which we don't talk about very often, is the fact that the treatments that we have don't work for a significant number of people. And unless we have treatment innovation, it's very hard to see those terrible mental health statistics changing in the foreseeable future. When you look at treatment outcomes, I've sort of summarized them here. With depression, current treatments are leading to remissions with maybe 1/3 of the people who suffer from depression. Another 1/3 roughly gets some sort of positive response, but not remission. And there's another 1/3 who are classified as, in quotes, treatment resistant. In other words, current treatments aren't working for them. The other point, obviously, to make is that with current treatments and antidepressants, they can have nasty side effects. And if ever you wanted to reinforce to somebody that they had a mental illness, what you'd end up doing is giving them a pill that they took every day, which is obviously what happens with SSRIs. With PTSD, the numbers are even worse. You know, when I talk to professors of psychiatry and other senior people in the mental health sphere working with PTSD, what they tell me is that remission rates for PTSD are probably less than 10%. And whilst response rates are a bit higher, the reality is that the vast number of people who have PTSD at the current time are not going to get treatments which will take them into remission. So, you know, the point that I want to emphasize here, which ties in nicely with today's webinar, is that a more of the same approach is not going to solve our mental health problems. We need innovation, and obviously innovation has to be within the context of safety, but we need innovation if we're going to make serious inroads into the mental health issues that we have in this country. Mind Medicine Australia is unabashedly a charity, and we've set up as a charity because we don't want to be influenced by conflict or affected by conflict. We're currently focused. The purpose of Mind Medicine is to broaden the treatment paradigm, so those terrible mental health statistics can start improving significantly. We're currently focused on psychedelics because really they are at the forefront of innovation in terms of the trials that have been done and the safety and efficacy data that's come out, particularly the high remission rates. For us, success is all about these therapies becoming an integral part of our mental health system, achieving high remission rates so that we do dramatically improve the mental health statistics. But just as importantly, we need these therapies to be accessible and affordable to all Australians. In other words, we do not want to see a situation where psychedelic therapies become a medical treatment in this country, but only wealthy people can afford them. That would be a real travesty of our country and our medical system if that happened. In terms of what we're doing, we're very much focused on developing the ecosystem in Australia so that these therapies can become a normal part of our mental health system. And we do it in 4 ways. The first way is awareness building, increasing knowledge in our communities so that more and more people become aware of these therapies. And in particular, the regulators and politicians start to understand from the community level that it really is time to change and acknowledge that whilst these substances have been prohibited for the last 50 years, they do have a place in medicine and they need to be brought into our medical system on an appropriate basis. The second area is professional development. Through Mind Medicine Institute, we're training clinicians in the use of psychedelic-assisted therapies. By the end of this year, we'll have graduated about 250 clinicians. We've also now got ethics approval for a healthy persons trial. And one of the benefits of that healthy persons trial is that it will enable clinicians who graduate from training courses in psychedelic-assisted therapy, so not just our training course, but any training course, to be eligible to participate in the healthy persons trial and actually experience these medicines in a medically controlled environment so they can understand exactly the patient experience. The third area is engagement with universities, and universities play a fundamental role, an incredibly important role in creating change through research and through education. Most of our focus to date has been working with Monash to establish the Neuromedicine's Discovery Centre at Monash, which is a centre of excellence focused on developing psychedelic-assisted therapies. And lastly, we're focused on all the practicalities involved in creating change in this country. And I'm sure all of you, or most of you, are aware that we're going through a rescheduling process at the moment where we've applied to the Commonwealth Government to reschedule the medical use of psilocybin and MDMA from Schedule 9, which is classified as a prohibited substance schedule, to Schedule 8, which is a controlled medicine schedule. And we've just passed the public submission period for that process, and we've had an enormous amount of support from clinicians and members of the public for change on the limited basis that we're suggesting. We've also now got supply arrangements for medical grade psilocybin and MDMA. So as soon as that rescheduling takes place, assuming it happens this time around, we've got medical supplies to support the clinicians. And we're working with clinical groups who are focused on developing the right protocols for clinical rollouts and so forth. So there's a lot happening at Mind Medicine Australia. How you can help us? Well, the obvious thing is just to talk about this. Be educated, understand where the trials are at, talk to people, colleagues, friends, associates. Importantly, talk to the politicians and if you can, the regulators, and make them realize it really is time for change. Volunteer with us, join our chapters. We've now got over 30 chapters around Australia. Donate if you have the capacity. The key question is for Australia, as I say at the bottom, is timelessness and availability. We just have to really keep the pressure on for change and enable this to be part of our system on a restricted basis for treatment-resistant patients with the right sort of protocols sooner rather than later. I've talked about our certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies. We have an amazing faculty, and I'd encourage you, if you're a clinician, to look at the caliber of faculty members on our website. You'll see there the quote from Professor David Nutt, that in his view, our course is, in quotes, the best of its kind in the world, which is high praise from somebody of David's standing. For those of you who don't want to do a certificate course, but actually want to increase your knowledge of these therapies, we have a shorter form fundamentals course, which is an online course over 4 weeks, 1 night a week. So again, I'd encourage you to go onto our website and have a look at that as well. As I say, join one of our local chapters and really spread the word about our webinar series. Each webinar is with a highly credentialed individual at the forefront of this area. And the way that we can impart knowledge is to really bring in the very best people in the world to talk about what they're doing and educate all of us on innovation and change within the context of safety. So that's really all I wanted to say by way of introduction. It now gives me really great pleasure to introduce Dr. Gazzaley. I'm not going to read out his entire profile because I think that would take me a long time because he's achieved so many things. But the bit that really caught my attention was the fact that he's the David Dolby Distinguished Professor in Neurology, Physiology and Psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco, and the founder and executive director of Neuroscape, which I'm sure we'll hear a lot about, which is a translational neuroscience center engaged in technology creation and scientific research. He designs and develops novel brain assessment and optimization tools to impact education, wellness, and medicine practices. And he's been particularly involved in leading the work on the use of video gaming as a tool to help people with mental illness. So without more, Dr. Gazzaley, I'd really hand it over to you to perhaps make some introductory works about what you're doing at the frontier of innovation, and then we might have some questions and answers. And I'd invite all of you to put any questions you have on the chat so that we can really make this a live session and really useful to everybody involved. You on mute, Adam?
You would think after 2.5 years of Zoom, I'd be able to press the unmute button. Thanks for having me here. It's evening over here. As you can see, sun setting in San Francisco, and it's great to connect with you. I look forward to the days of doing this the days that'll come of doing this in person. I was supposed to be visiting you over there in Australia right after COVID started. So that trip unfortunately was canceled. But I look forward to engaging with everyone, and thanks for jumping on Zoom to hear this conversation. I much prefer to have question and answer and back and forth and interactions on Zoom than just presenting a slide talk. That's why I'm not doing that. But I do want to give you some context and some background, especially because my work with psychedelics is more recent in my career. And I find that taken out of context of what I work on, the connection is sometimes missed. So I do want to spend a little time not talking about psychedelics, talking about the work that I've been engaged in for the last, I guess, around 15 years now, both as a professor at University of California, San Francisco, as well as an entrepreneur and founder of a company called Achille Interactive. So I'll wear two hats in my opening remarks. First, a little bit about my background, because I think that is also helpful to understand my perspective. I was trained as an MD PhD. My PhD was in neuroscience, and my medical training was in neurology. I'm a clinical neurologist, although I haven't seen patients recently. When I did see patients, those patients had Alzheimer's disease usually, or other types of dementia. And my research started at sort of animal-based classic neuroscience through a microscope looking at plasticity in the brain. And then as a postdoc and a faculty member, my work migrated from microscopy to functional brain imaging. And I started studying the human brain and became, I guess, what we now call cognitive neuroscientist, looking at the neural mechanisms of memory, attention, perception, and how they change with aging was my main focus. And what I think brings me to speak with you today, and most audiences now, is not my neuroscience work on basic neural mechanisms, but the translational work that I started doing 14 years ago. And it was one that was really born out of frustration. And you already heard the intense need in your country and around the world for solutions to mental health challenges. And they are growing. The burden is increasing, especially in our youth, attention deficits and depression, anxiety, suicide, and in our seniors in terms of memory impairments and dementia. But across pretty much all domains, we see that while the reverse trend of decrease in suffering and death has occurred in cardiac disease, infectious disease, despite what's happening with COVID, that's true. And when we look at conditions of the mind, we see the reverse occurring. And so there's great need. And I was frustrated 14 years ago by this phenomena, really from the perspective of being a clinician and not having really effective solutions for patients that presented with changes in their cognition as they were getting older. Also, I was confronted with it from a research perspective because I was studying, I guess, what I was known for before the work that I'll describe in a moment. My previous work was focused on distraction and multitasking and how we're not very good at it and how we get worse as we get older. And this is like now almost a meme and common, perspective that this is what's happening. But 20 years ago, when I started working on attention and how it's being fragmented and how we're not very good at multitasking, it was actually rather new research at the time. And it was that research that led me to think about approaches to help improving attention abilities. That's how this whole path started for me. And that year was 2008. And I was like, how can we improve attention in older adults? We see that this decline occurs with age. And by the way, when I say older adults here, I mean everyone above 23 years old. So this is a phenomenon that occurs throughout our lifespan where our high rapid processing capacities and our attention diminishes. And so we know that we don't have very effective pharmaceutical tools to help with these changes in cognition. And I became interested in going back to my roots as a neuroscientist, where I studied plasticity in the brain. And I believe probably most of the listeners are familiar with plasticity, the ability of our brain to modify and optimize its function in response to experience or injury. experience is one of the main driving forces of plasticity. It occurs in everyone all the time at every level. Structure, chemistry, physiology is constantly reforming in response to challenges from the environment and changes in your conditions. And so the idea that I had back in 2008 was, could we create an experience that could be delivered in an accessible way to deal with equity issues that not everyone has access to, real world experiences that have shown benefit, like meditation and music and dance. And, we've used experience for thousands of years as a solution for suffering mental states. And I thought that technology, while it has challenged our brain in so many ways, and I wrote an entire book on this topic called The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. So it's worth pausing and noting that technology has challenged our brains. But what I thought would be interesting would be to flip that around and see if we could use technology as a tool to improve attention abilities. And so with that beginning idea, I started thinking about what type of experience could we deliver digitally in a way that people would find engaging enough to deeply immerse themselves and to continue to engage in it over time. And I thought, video games. That's the power of video games. They are fun, they're entertaining, they're interactive. And could we deliver an experience that targets improving attention abilities and build it in a video game envelope so that it has all those benefits that we see from the entertainment side of that field. And so in 2008, I reached out to friends of mine that worked at a really successful video game company called LucasArts, George Lucas's video game company. And I designed a game that I had in mind, and they helped me develop it. And that game was called Neuroracer. It took us around a year to build that game. And that game was then tested in a series of studies in my laboratory at UCSF. And what we found was that the older adults who participated in that study and played the game, and they played it for 1 hour a day, 3 days a week for 4 weeks. So just 12 hours of gameplay, that they improved their ability to play the game, not surprising, but still an example of plasticity. But what was more gratifying and important was that we also improved their sustained attention abilities and their working memory for faces on very different type of tests that we've done before and after. And this was against 2 control groups. One, which was a no contact control group, just looking for practice effects on the outcome measures. And the other was a group that played a different version of Neuroracer that didn't have the same interference challenges that the treatment version of Neuroracer had. And that group did not show these same improvements. So we were able to show this improvement, this transfer of benefits from playing the game to attention and other cognitive abilities outside of the game. We showed that some abilities like multitasking on the game itself sustained 6 months later. And we also recorded brain activity before and after gameplay to determine the neural mechanism of both the improvement in transfer measures as well as the sustained benefits. And we found that it was improved connectivity, functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex, the most evolved part of our brain, and the rest of our brain, the posterior visual areas. And so that was very exciting. That was a 5-year journey from that idea all the way to a paper that was published in Nature. It was the cover of Nature in 2013. For any scientists on the call, that's a really, very important moment in sort of the story of a research study. But for us, that was really just the beginning, because that paper wasn't a validation paper, wasn't a phase 3 trial. It was a signal that we can build a video game, target it to a certain aspect of cognition, and show through careful methodology and placebo control that we can get improvements that are meaningful and sustainable. And with that event, everything changed in my life. And so the first thing was that my lab became a research center called Neuroscape, which took that idea of a video game as a therapeutic to much higher levels. And Neuroscape continues to grow. To today, we have over 10 faculty members. We just hired our 10th faculty member, 3 during COVID. And what we build are interactive experiences. They don't have to be video games, but they're closed loop experiences, meaning that while you interact with the gameplay, data is being recorded, and in real time, it's updating the challenges and the rewards that you receive. And we have many, many types of video games. Not all of them are action video games like NeuroRacer. Some are eyes closed that take principles from breath-focused concentrative meditation and bring in adaptive rewards and challenges. We published 3 papers on that, showing that that game can improve attention abilities in children and healthy adults. And now we're submitting a paper on seniors showing that it doesn't just improve attention, but it also improves stress responsivity, as well as telomere length, which is a crazy, interesting finding. We also have games that take place in virtual reality. A lot of our games are mobile. We use rhythm, music, dance in some of our games. Some of our games are targeted at improving memory abilities. We now have games that are reaching beyond attention and memory to look at emotional regulation, empathy, and compassion. We also show recently that we can couple our games with non-invasive brain stimulation to help accelerate the positive effects that we see during gameplay. So that's a little bit of what Neuroscape does. And most recently, we started a psychedelics division, which I will pause and come back to and explain how that fits in with what Neuroscape's doing. But before that, I want to tell you about the other path that occurred after 2013. One was that my lab at UCSF became a research center, and I'm still a full-time professor at UCSF. That is most distinctly my day job. But I also co-founded a company called Achille Interactive. I don't have an executive role there, but I am the inventor of the technology and a board member. And what we did, Achille licensed the patent that describes the methodology behind NeuroRacer. And then over the last decade, built out a way better game that uses the same methodology as NeuroRacer. That game is called Endeavor RX, much higher level of art, music, story, interactivity. And we now have, with Achille's support, and not just me, I'm actually not usually an author on most of the recent papers with that game, but there have been over 30 clinical trials showing that that game replicates the effects we saw in the Nature paper of improving sustained attention, but in diverse populations: autism, depression, multiple sclerosis, early dementia, and most notably a phase 3 trial done out of Duke University. I was not an author on that paper, with children that have ADHD. And the methodology of that paper was really quite remarkable. So this was a multi-site, prospectively designed, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial on a video game in children with 8 to 12-year-olds with ADHD. And the results of that study showed that it was able to improve their attention abilities outside of the game, and also showed some real-world functional improvement in their behaviors. That game was positioned to the FDA, and after several years of presenting for the first time ever a video game to the FDA, it was approved as a Class 2 medical device to treat inattention in children with ADHD. That happened in 2020. So after a decade of effort, we finally took that game into the clinical domain, where it is now a prescribable video game for the first time ever. And that is happening right now. We're going through the challenging commercialization of a completely new medical treatment. And we are also expanding the indications to those other populations that showed benefits. So that is a high level flyover of Neuroscape, which is a not-for-profit academic research center at UCSF, where we do a lot of the incubation and deep dive research studies of these new technologies. And then Achille Interactive, which has taken one game, NeuroRacer, through high-level development and then clinical validation to medical device approval. So maybe I'll pause there for a moment. I've been monologuing for a while, and then I could tell you about how this collides with the world of psychedelics and what we're doing there.
Thank you very much for that, Adam, and please come in with any questions you have for Adam. But the question that occurred to me as you were speaking, Adam, is that this really is a brave new world of medical treatments in the mental illness space. When you crystal ball gaze about the future, how far forward do you think it will be when you go in to see your doctor with a mental illness problem, and the doctor talks about different treatments. And one of the treatments he or she talks about is the use of video games.
Well, that is happening right now. So, in the US, for children with ADHD, doctors are having discussions with their patients that there is an FDA-approved video game to treat inattention, and they are prescribing that game. So that, it's funny because I look at some old TED Talks I've given like 7 years ago saying, any day now, this game will be an FDA-approved treatment, which is not true. It took a long time. But now I can say that is actually happening now, which is really gratifying after so long. And sometimes I thought it was never even going to happen because, it's a lot to take such a different type of product through a very traditional regulatory agency. Now, the prediction of the future is that is just the beginning, and Achille will not be the only company with an FDA-approved video game, but we will see others, and we will see them across a diverse array of indications, and we will see them use different delivery devices from mobile platforms, which is where our current treatment is targeted, to virtual reality and other types of sensory immersive technologies. I believe that this will be a big part of the future of medicine, but that is a crystal ball, and that is a prediction.
All right. Well, the one that caught my attention as you were talking, and when you said that aging, and you talked about people in their 20s onwards, I've got to say that I'm a long way past being in my 20s, and you talked about Neuroscience helping sustain focus and recognition of faces, and the minute I heard that, I thought, oh, I'd love to get hold of that. How far away is that one from potentially being available?
Yeah, so the game that I described, Neuroscience, that had those outcomes is essentially the same game as EndeavorRx that's now approved for ADHD treatment. And we are doing more studies on older adults and looking for approval pathways in seniors, especially those that have early dementia. Mild cognitive impairment is one of our main focus areas. The really painful part of all this is that although the treatment it's not specific for any clinical condition. It really acts on the neural networks involved in attention. And that's what we see study after study. But regulatory approval doesn't work that way. You can't get something approved as an attention treatment for any condition that has attention problems. I really wish that was the case. You have to very, very narrowly define your indication in a pre-submission to the FDA. And then essentially the label on our bottle, which is a video game, is the protocol of that phase 3 trial. So it's approved for children 8 to 12 years old, not even 13-year-olds, with inattention and ADHD, which was the study protocol methodology. Now, we have lots of other data that's not quite at the phase 3 level showing that it has benefits across multiple populations. So we will continue to expand the indications. And then there's all the other games at Neuroscience that are very different than Endeavor, but have benefits in different aspects of cognition. And they have different types of gameplay that are appealing to different people. Not everyone likes the fast-paced, attention engaging game that is Endeavor. MetaTrain, our meditation game, is very slow paced and eyes closed, and so I think there's an entire field here that needs to be born, but it is a stepwise process to take each of these through the clinical pathway.
Right. And I've got a question here. I mean, the game that has gone through and become registered for ADHD, is that available in Australia, or is that just registered in the States?
I think right now it is FDA approved, but it hasn't gone through the Australian approval pathway. So I guess it would be, if used at all, it would be off label. We are now looking for expansion across other countries, and we have lots of discussions in Europe. I'm not, like I said, I'm not an executive of the company, so I don't know every conversation and partnership that's going on, but there is interest in expanding in Australia. I know that.
Right. Well, I suspect there's a lot of interest in this call on this call, having heard you.
Well, that's good to hear.
Just one more question before you move on to psychedelics.
Sure.
When I look at the future, and experience this constant acceleration that we've all experienced because of technology. If we don't have treatment innovation, it seems to me that it's inevitable that mental illness will get worse because of the challenges for the human brain just to simply keep up and have all these, all these different influences on us through technology as we go through our daily lives, whether it's emails, social media, whatever it is. Is my view one that you share, or are you more optimistic?
No, I do share that. That's I'm in general, I am an optimist. I do believe the future is bright, but I do have a lot of concerns about the current state of the human mind, to express it generally that way. After I wrote the book, The Distracted Mind, years later, I realized that the problem was broader than I positioned it in the book. And I wrote a piece that's freely available online called The Cognition Crisis. And it is all about what you just said. It's a short piece, but it basically zooms in on the current status of the human mind and our inability to sort of up-level it over time, and how technology has really challenged us in a very fundamental way, and that we're in trouble, at crisis level trouble. I do think that it is a crisis that we are in right now when it comes to the health of our minds, and it's not just clinical populations. I mean, just all you have to do is read the daily news to see the struggles that we're having in long-term thinking and critical decision making and empathic concern. I mean, it's horrifying to me outside of the clinical domain. Yep. And I also think it's a crisis because if we don't improve the way we sustain our attention and make these more, wiser and longer term decisions, we'll never effectively deal with other crises like climate change. It doesn't matter how much information we acquire. It involves more than knowledge. We actually have to think at a higher level to be able to handle problems like that. So I do think that if we don't figure out how to be more innovative and do something different than we've been trying to do for the last 70 years, that we're really in big trouble.
Right. All right. Well, I'm sure that will lead to some questions. I think this would be a great time to then move into the psychedelic space. And,
sure.
Hear your views on that.
Well, this is so easy now that we just had that discussion. And once I tell you, you realize how much easier it is than if we just started here. Because why would someone that builds video games and other interactive experiences to improve cognition be interested in psychedelics? And the reality is, I thought that psychedelics were not something that I would be interested in because it's a molecule that initiates these changes. And I was like, well, we don't do that. We actually have a different approach, what I call experiential medicine. So that's a term that I've been using. I actually have the domain experientialmedicine.com because I think will be an emerging field, and it actually has been around thousands of years. I think it's just being reinvented now through technology, but it's the idea that experience can be medicine for the mind. And I thought that molecules were over here and experiential medicine was where I was, building video games and VR solutions. But after reading Michael Pollan's book, which I'm sure most people here have read, I was like, psychedelics are experiential medicine. It was literally as close in my life to having an epiphany as I felt I ever had. And I know it's funny to call it an epiphany because probably everyone on this call has already had that realization that molecules initiate these treatments, but the outcomes are very heavily driven by the experience itself, whether they're good or bad or good versus transformative. And upon realizing the experiential nature of these treatments, I thought that it would play a really interesting role when combined with the technologies that we use at Neuroscape. And so that was the path that started psychedelics as a focus at Neuroscape. Now, that started right before COVID, I guess like 6 months before 2019, maybe the end of 2018. And I did a deep dive into reading the literature and then meeting thought leaders in the space that I was able to meet through Michael and through other friends. And then I'd say another big inflection point was when I went to the UK to give a talk at Imperial and head to Oxford and meet Robin Carhart-Harris, who I stayed with, who's my host, and presented just what I presented to you right now, what we do with video games and virtual reality as experiential medicine. And I pose there the challenge.
Sorry, could you say that again?
There's my watch is talking to me. Talk about technology. Don't listen. I don't know how that got triggered. So yes, I posed the question to this audience of psychedelic researchers. Did they think that psychedelics and these type of technologies could in some way work together to personalize and more precisely target the experience and lead to better outcomes? And so that was the goal of my talk, and it was really well received. And as people here may or may not know, Robin Card-Harris has now moved from Imperial College to UCSF and to Neuroscape, where he is the director of our division of psychedelic research. And so our focus, which is probably not a surprise now that you heard the context, is to think about using technology in two ways to advance this field. The first is to use multimodal biosensing, so physiological recordings across multiple different physiological regions of interest, to be able to look inside the black box, so that when someone is going through a psychedelic treatment, we can understand their state in the moment. And obviously not the content of what they're thinking, but their level of arousal, their, hopefully their awareness, their attention, the valence, the mood that they're experiencing. So that's one focus of technology. The other is how we can use technology to help support set and setting in a more consistent, reproducible, and testable manner. So can we present sensory stimuli, not just music, but visual information, smell, tactile stimuli, to lead to better experiences? Can we use this before and after for both intention setting as well as integration and processing after a treatment? These are all things that we're very interested in and are starting to build out that research program. Eventually, where we hope this will go is that we will have closed loop psychedelic treatments, meaning that we can detect the real-time state of an individual after they take a psychedelic, like psilocybin is one of our main areas of interest, and then use our tools to change the environment that they're being exposed to, what they're hearing, smelling, seeing, and feeling while they go through this experience to lead to better outcomes. So that's a little bit of what we're gearing up to work on. I think you're on mute, Peter.
Sorry, that was technology on my side. That leads to I think some fascinating questions. I mean, the first question is, if you can get technology and video gaming and virtual reality so well developed, do you think we can get to a stage where you actually don't need to take the medicine? In other words, the virtual reality experience actually becomes the psychedelic experience?
I mean, it's possible. And it's possible that it's true for some people and not other people. It's possible that some people have a powerful enough experience without psychedelics that a lot of the transformation that can occur with psychedelics may be possible without that. And then other people are just very entrenched. They might have a debilitating condition like PTSD, where they need the plasticity inducing effects and the perception shifting aspects of the psychedelics to help increase the fluidity of their system and let them reform those networks in a healthier way. And then maybe it could be sustained without psychedelics through these types of more experiential interventions that occur over time.
Right. And but before just one other question I have is that before I start reading out some of the questions we're getting in, the psychedelic experience is, with psilocybin, it's an extraordinary experience if you get the dosing right. The patient loses control of self, and the mind just seems to wander, and all sorts of things come into the mind, and people come out of it feeling generally incredibly connected, and which is obviously one of the benefits. What is the core benefit, I think, from a treatment perspective. But is there a risk that we can have like sensory overload when we combine a greater use of technology with an experience which is already an out there experience for human beings?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that we spend hundreds of hours talking about. So I'll answer in several ways. One is that these type of sensory stimulation may be appropriate sort of at the very beginning of a treatment, and then at the end, sort of like as an onboarding and an offboarding, and maybe at the highest experiential moments, even going to complete silence is appropriate. That's something that we're interested in experimenting with. So it may not be applied equally throughout an entire treatment. It may also be reasonable to have lower doses of psychedelics like psilocybin during a very high stimulation treatment, that you don't need as much of the psychedelic if you also have a very rich sensory experience. This is hypothesis. It's still an untested question that we're very interested in. I didn't mention this, but the sensory stimuli and experience that we're working on delivering is one of nature. There's a really rich, not scientific literature, but a rich perspective from the world, from the field, even for thousands of years, of the benefits of nature and its intersection with psychedelics. We're very interested in that. And so the stimuli will be one of trees and the smell of grass and the visuals of waterfalls. So it'll be really a nature journey that will be delivered in concert with a psychedelic. And I think the open questions are, how is the dosing going to be influenced by this occurring at the same time? And how does this journey get delivered over the course of the treatment, given what you described as a very high peak moment that might not be amenable to that?
Yep. Yep. I mean, the other, well, one of my, if I could, when I look forward into the future with these therapies, one of the things that concerns me, and I'm sure it concerns a lot of people on this call, is that, you know, we have a lot to learn from Indigenous communities in terms of how they've used these medicines as part of ceremony. And you've touched there upon the importance of nature and being part of the experience. It seems to me there's a real risk that this will become part of a clinical environment and will pretty up the room, but actually we'll be dealing with clinicians who are under pressure, under time pressure, and suddenly the experience will be compromised by the needs of the medical system in terms of efficiency and so forth. Do you think that's a realistic concern, or?
Yeah, I do think it's a concern. And I think that that is one of the potential opportunities of technology, to be able to, you know, you're not going to have like hundreds of thousands of masters available to help all the people in need. This is not to say that humans should not be part of this equation. I think it is critical that humans are involved here. I'm not saying that this is some completely AI-driven virtual reality experience with psilocybin that you do at home. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I believe having tools like this that can help create richer context and even safer environments through stimuli, nature stimuli, when driven by the person's own physiology, so that it's personalized for them. Okay. I think that this can help therapists deliver care in a way that will allow greater scaling.
Well, that's very exciting. All right. Well, just some questions from the chat. The first one here is from Benny, and I think I know the answer, but the question is, in addition to NeuroRace's clinical application to improve patients with attention disorders, is there a sense that it has positive impacts on attention for the neuronormal as a means of brain training? In other words, it'll become not just part of our medical system, but become part, but be available for anybody who wants to access.
Yeah, so it's funny because I bet almost all the questions about the video game treatment could equally apply to psychedelic questions, which is something I've observed over the years, which is fascinating. Yes, I believe that both for psychedelics, but certainly for video game treatment, because of the lower side effect profile, this will be an asset of this treatment in terms of commercializing it to not just people that have clinical conditions, but as a wellness tool to help attention more broadly. And we already have, data that speaks to that. It's just tricky from a business perspective on how do you have a medical device product and a consumer facing product. And this is something that is a big interest of ours to, to reach more people in need, not just ones that fall into a very clear diagnostic label.
Right, okay. The next question is from Anita, and just to sort of summarize it, we tend to talk about psychedelic treatments, and I also now the sort of treatments that you're looking at with technology as being focused on treatment-resistant people. Presumably, we want to get to a stage where there are frontline treatment, a first-line treatment as well, that a patient has the choice with their doctor between SSRIs, use of technology, psychedelics, TMS, whatever's available. Is that how you see it?
Undoubtedly. I think that we need to advance beyond where we're at now is just mostly excited that we're able to even do this research at all. And if we could get it approved for the people that are treatment resistant, most needy, breakthrough therapy, we'll take it and it'll help those people. But I don't think that anyone that I know thinks that that is the end goal here. The end goal here is to completely reimagine what medicine for the mind is. And I am really excited about what we're seeing in the lab and the traction that we're starting to make with regulatory agencies, reimbursement, physicians themselves, patients. Things are shifting, but change is slow.
Change is slow, which is a bit at odds, isn't it, with the acceleration we're seeing everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question here from Jamie. Which of your video platforms would you suggest for somebody who is, in quotes, video game phobic? In other words, do these video games work with everybody, or is there a limit?
Yeah, well, there are definitely different predilections to video games, no video games. Most people that are in our studies, especially the old adults, have not played video games and they find it enjoyable. It's very different playing a video game for entertainment versus an entertaining video game that you're playing to help your attention abilities that you find are subpar. So it's a different experience. It's sort of like, running for no reason versus running because you're in a marathon and you're trying to finish a race and reach some level of satisfaction and accomplishing something that was important to you. And so people that are usually uninterested in video games, but are interested in improving their memory abilities, wind up finding the games actually pretty fun. But it's true, it's not going to be for everyone, which is one of the reasons that we build a lot of different types of video games. So like our meditation game, I mean, it's barely a game. It does have rewards and adaptivity, but it is very, very close to traditional concentrative meditation, just delivered in more accessible format. But it is, interesting to some people that don't like traditional video games.
Right, okay. A question here from Ron, which is a really good question, and that is that I think part of the psychedelic experience is supposed to be at the pace of the individual going through the experience. In other words, it's for the experience, it's for the individual to discover things.
Right.
Is there a risk that technology can actually manipulate that in a way that takes away that sort of self-discovery process that...
Right. Well, I'll argue against that and say that that is not how psychedelics are routinely administered, certainly in the clinical setting. So the act of music being played while you are going through a treatment, in the real world, that music is often being changed by a therapist in response to your responses. But almost every clinical trial I know is using music already, which can be thought of as manipulative from some perspectives or not from others. And shamanic traditions have rich context that is delivered from the things that occur before the treatment starts, to drumming, to scent, to visuals, to fire, to dance, movement. It's a big part of psychedelic treatment. So I would say that experience delivery outside of the compound itself has, from traditional perspective and modern clinical perspective, been a big part of the treatments already. And technology is just another example of that. And yeah, you could be, manipulative by intention or manipulative by accident. But I think that it's always a danger when you're not having someone just lie there in silence with a mask on, which is not usually how these treatments occur. Our goals are certainly not to try to drive someone, but to present an environment that allows them to sort of paint their own story on top of it. So it's not like there's content and it's not like a news program. It's basically just nature. And so I think in that sense, it might even have less of a narrative than a lot of music that's being presented during psychedelic treatments have, where it's really just a canvas. That's how I view it, that we're presenting a canvas for you to then do a lot of your own healing and tell your own stories. But this is still early days for us in the research. And I don't mean to be dismissive. It's a really good question from the perspective that we always have to be careful that we're not manipulating or leading someone. And it's a big issue, but I think that it's always present right now in everything we do. And if we're thoughtful about it, we could minimize that as best we can.
Well, you're getting a lot of comments in the chat, by the way. Thank yous, and comments like "This is epic," and it's certainly this is mind expanding stuff that you're talking about in terms of looking at the future and what could become of the future. One of the questions, and it's a good one, is that you talked about technology being used to record physiological changes in the body as a person's going through the psychedelic experience. To what extent do you think technology can technology be used to actually generate a picture of what's actually happening for the person?
That is what our goals are. So, specific aim number one is to open up this black box and to really understand in real time what someone's experience on a psychedelic is. And that has not been done. And that's one of the strong connection points between Robin and myself, is really to bring on the latest and greatest in biosensor technology, signal processing, machine learning, neuroscience. We've been gathering experts across all of those domains for many years to allow us to track state in real time. And by state, I mean attention, arousal, valence, and awareness. If we could track those to some degree as a treatment is occurring, it'll give us tremendous insight into where that person is and how we could better to support them.
Right. Next question I've got here, and I'm conscious of time. I can see that in your part of the world, night is very much there.
That has changed behind me. I have to keep adjusting the lights here.
Question from Josh: which consumer level biofeedback devices would you recommend specifically for meditation training and/or parasympathetic response?
Yeah, I don't really like giving recommendations about particular products for lots of reasons. But for this particular question, I don't really know because we don't use them and I don't use them personally. So at Neuroscape, we have, really sophisticated stimulation and recording equipment that we use for our neurofeedback style studies. I know that there has been a lot of interest, but a real slow slope on seeing improvements in consumer level recording devices and feedback. I know there's a lot of good companies like Muse working on them. I just wouldn't be able to compare across them.
Right. Okay. Look, another question. We hear a lot about the potential. One vision for the future is that we have implants in our brains which connect to the cloud in some way, and that makes us even more efficient. And I've got to say, personally, I find that horrifying. But is that a realistic vision for the future? And how do you think the human brain will accommodate that, given some of your other comments?
Yeah, I mean, it's a realistic vision to some people, as we know. I have never been attractive to invasive neurotechnology personally and professionally. I think that there is a tremendous amount we can do without cutting into someone's head. So all of our work at Neuroscape is non-invasive, from our brain stimulation to virtual reality to, all of the sensory immersive technologies that we're using and the closed loop video games. I'd say the most invasive we got is the coupling with a molecule that you take. So I think that if there is invasive technology, implantable technology in the future, it will be for debilitating conditions like it exists right now. Like for Parkinson's disease, there are deep brain stimulators that could stop a tremor on a dime, and they're valuable and they're worth it for those individuals. But in terms of it just being implanted in everyone, I just don't see it.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that, by the way. Just maybe two final questions.
Sure.
I'm conscious of your time. The first question here is, what are your thoughts on the development of non-hallucinogenic psychedelic derivatives to address problems of scalability with traditional psychedelic therapy?
Yeah, great question. I think that from my read of the literature, there are two main properties of psychedelics that are leading to the therapeutic benefits we're seeing. One of them is the pro-plasticity effects, the seeming ability, both in animal studies and some data in human, although we'd like to see more, showing that the plasticity process itself can be accelerated in the presence of these compounds. Now, I'd like to also point out that some of that data exists for non-psychedelic mushrooms, like lion's mane has some accumulating data showing also pro-plasticity effects. The other aspect, sort of the quite noticeable one to anyone that tries a psychedelic, is not the plasticity inducing effects, it's the perception shifting aspects of it. And I do think that that is part of the therapeutic pathway, is the sort of reshuffling of the deck, the ability to reframe experience and to move through sticking points and entrenched thinking, which is probably why we see benefits for a lot of conditions that have that as characteristics, like PTSD and depression and addiction. So I think it's probably a combination of both. And I think if you remove the perception shifting, cognitive altering aspects of psychedelics, but leave the plasticity inducing effects, there would be benefits. But I would say in that case, it would be better to couple it with another type of experience, like a video game, which is actually an area of interest of mine, is coupling non-psychedelic mushrooms with a video game treatment, because then you have the plasticity inducing effects of the mushroom and the experience, the targeted experience that's being induced by a video game. So that's an interesting combination to me.
Right. So we have this fascinating sort of juxtaposition of an accelerating world. Your comment said, without change, we're likely to see, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but a worsening mental health environment with these new treatments coming through, and which are really paradigm shifting in terms of the way they operate, and a regulatory environment that is incredibly slow relative to the pace of change we're seeing. How does all of that fit together in your mind?
Well, I mean, it's what I do every single day. It's figuring out how to accomplish this, not at a snail's pace, but to accelerate it. It's really challenging. I hope that with some examples of success, both Achilles' success with Endeavor, what we're seeing happening with MDMA for PTSD treatment, psilocybin for depression, that there'll be these spears that penetrate the fortress, the current fortress that prevents more rapid change. And that once that occurs, that it will open up, it'll be like a rift will occur. It'll open up all these opportunities that will start cascading. It'll be impossible for insurance companies to not reimburse for this once the real world effects start accumulating. It would be, poor practice to not consider one of these options when they're available, even if you're a traditionally minded physician. Like, these are the things that will hopefully occur once we've broken into the system, which is in the process of happening right now.
Yep. Well, fingers crossed, because it's one of the challenges that we have, and we're very conscious of in terms of the time it's taking in Australia for even the base level psychedelic therapies to be acknowledged by regulators. If I may, I said two questions, but there's a last one here which just fascinates me. And it's with your equipment, is it going to be possible, this is a question from Michael, to reveal the world of subtle energies that are flowing through the mind and the body during the psychedelic experience?
Yeah, I believe that we need more data from just the brain itself, which is why our multimodal biosensing program is signals captured throughout the body, from electrodermal activity to heart rate, respiratory rate, facial expressions, cardiac contractility, eye movements, pupil responses. The states that are occurring are difficult to capture with a single modality. And so, yes, I think that's what the question is sort of in the spirit of the question, is that these are subtle energies and we need a lot of different converging multimodal data to be able to make sense of it. That's at least my hypothesis. That's what drives a lot of our research.
Well, if psychedelics are all about mind expansion, this conversation's certainly done that for me. And what it said to me is that our immediate task is to get these therapies available in our mental health system in a safe way, so that people who are treatment resistant can get access to them. And then hopefully over time, they become a first line treatment. But at the same time, we've got to also be thinking that the next stage of the development is going to be the technology development that you're working on. And so it's going to be a fascinating journey, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, what a great use of technology to help improve the human mind. And we have just done a disservice with all this amazing technology that we've created around the world. And in many ways, it's diminished us as humans. And I think it has so much more potential. And coupling it in these ways, it's really challenging for people to reframe technology that's really been in the entertainment communication world that has all these challenges with teenage depression. Like, I get it, it's complicated, but they're powerful technologies. They have incredible accessibility around the world in a way that we've never accomplished almost with anything else ever before. So if we allow ourselves to expand our perspective about what's possible with them, I think that we'll see that they can really unlock a lot of the potential of these other treatments.
Well, that seems a great place to stop, but I'm getting lots of thanks and through the chat and comments like very enlightening, inspiring talk. Thank you. I mean, certainly for me, and I think I speak on behalf of everybody, it's been a fascinating conversation. And I just want to personally thank you for the work you do and the way you're trying to change the paradigm in a way that actually serves humanity, rather than what we're seeing often with technology. And you've just said it, and that is the diminishment of our humanity. So on behalf of us, thank you very much for being part of this and giving us your wisdom today.
Thanks. And you could read more about what we're doing at neuroscape.ucsf.edu. And our psychedelics division is well described there, the work that Robin's pioneering. And it's really wonderful. We're, a site in the MDMA for PTSD trial with MAPS. And we'll be expanding. You'll see a lot of great stuff. And you also see all of our video game work on there too. And I have a website, Gazzaley.com, which is sort of an aggregate of all the things I'm involved in. It's a lot, but hopefully I'll get to meet you in person, and thanks for your attention today.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you as a guest in Australia as and when your schedule allows for it.
I'd love it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, cheers.